a 5'4" woman with the quiet demeanor of a scholar, dreaming of taming the A-10 warthog. She'd be more at home in the archives than the cockpit. The whispers followed her like a shadow. They had no idea that in a matter of hours, 381 of the nation's elite soldiers would be caught in a death trap she alone had foreseen. When superior jets proved useless and rescue helicopters fell from the sky, her secret obsession would become their last and only prayer. The air in the mess hall was thick with the smells of boiled coffee and indifference. Captain Alara Vance kept her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, a universe of gray swirls that was safer than the sea of faces around her. She balanced her tray in one hand, its metallic coolness, a small, solid anchor in the churning tide of the room. The laughter still echoed in her ears, sharp and jagged like shattered glass. It wasn't a new sound, but it never lost its edge. She was 28, small-framed with dark brown hair pulled back in a bun so severe it seemed to pull at the corners of her intelligent, hazel eyes. No makeup dusted her pale skin, no jewelry adorned her throat or fingers. There was only the standard-issue flight suit, a thing of olive-drab fabric that hung just a little too loose on her shoulders, as if even her uniform thought she was an imposter. She'd grown up in a world away from this desert expanse, in a stone manor on the East Coast where money was as old and quiet as the portraits on the walls. She was taught to speak softly, to excel without fanfare, to lead with intellect, not volume. But here, at Al-Qarid Air Base, a speck of American might, in a vast, unforgiving landscape, that quiet upbringing was a liability. People saw her plainness and filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. She was timid, she was weak, she was less capable, less important, less everything a combat pilot was supposed to be. Ilara set her tray down at an empty table in the far corner, the clatter of her fork against the plastic loud in a sudden lull. A few heads turned. At the next table, a group of F-16 pilots glanced over, their smirks barely concealed. One of them, Lieutenant Jet Ryder, a man whose confidence was as slick and polished as his gelled hair, leaned back in his chair. He whispered something to his wingman, a low rumble that was immediately followed by a burst of derisive laughter. Alara didn't look up. She focused on her chicken, cutting it into precise, geometric pieces with a steady hand. Her face was a placid mask, a calm surface over the turbulent waters beneath. This base had been her home for 2 years, but it had never once felt like it. She hadn't joined the Air Force for camaraderie or accolades. She had joined to fly. Specifically, to feel the immense, brutal weight of an A-10 warthog respond to her touch, to prove to herself, and perhaps to the ghosts of her family's expectations, that she could master something so raw and powerful. They had wanted her in a courtroom or a boardroom. She had chosen a cockpit. She had graduated at the top of her class, aced every exam, logged every required hour with meticulous precision. But none of it mattered. Here, she wasn't Captain Vance, top of her class. She was the librarian, or worse, the paperwork princess. They saw her size, heard her quiet voice, and dismissed her before she even opened her mouth. They didn't know her family could buy this entire base and turn it into a bird sanctuary if they wished. Alara never told them. Respect bought with a last name was worthless. She wanted to earn it with her hands on the stick and her eyes on the horizon. That evening, the scene shifted to the rec room, but the atmosphere remained the same. The air was stale with the scent of beer and masculine pride. A group of pilots, led by Ryder, were engrossed in a loud game of poker. Their laughter was a weapon, loud and sharp, meant to include some and pointedly exclude others. Ilara sat alone in a worn armchair in the corner, a thick flight manual open on her lap, its pages filled with diagrams of hydraulic systems and weapons ballistics. Her focus was broken by a gravelly voice. "Vance, you trying to memorize that thing? Trying to impress someone?" She looked up. It was Lieutenant Commander Webb, a senior pilot with a permanent scowl etched into his face. The poker game paused, all eyes turning to their designated entertainment for the evening. Ryder, never one to miss an opportunity, chimed in with a sneer. "Yeah, Vance, stick to fetching coffee. It's a mission you can't fail." The table erupted. Alara's fingers, which had been tracing a schematic of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, paused. Her gaze lifted, meeting Webb's for a brief, steady moment. "I'm studying," she said, her voice even, almost too soft to cut through the noise. The room laughed harder, a cruel, dismissive sound, but she simply turned the page. Her hands didn't tremble. She absorbed the information on the next page, as if their mockery was nothing more than meaningless static. On her way to the barracks later, a gauntlet of casual cruelty awaited her. She passed the main bulletin board, a hub of official notices and informal jibes. Pinned right in the center was a new addition, a crudely drawn cartoon. It depicted a tiny, stick-figure pilot drowning in an oversized flight suit, flailing inside a massive cockpit. A speech bubble from the tiny figure read, "Help, I can't reach the pedals." Below it, in bold letters, was the label, "The Inventory Queen." A group of ground crew mechanics nearby saw her stop. They snickered, one nudging another as she approached the board. "Look, it's our ace pilot," a man with a patchy beard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ilara stopped. Her eyes scanned the cartoon, taking in every mocking detail. Her expression didn't change. She reached up, her movements deliberate, and unpinned the drawing. She didn't crumple it in anger or rip it to shreds. She folded it, once, twice, with crisp, neat creases, and slid it into the pocket of her flight suit. She did it all without a word. The mechanics' laughter died in their throats. Their faces, moments before alight with mirth, now held a flicker of unease. There was something unnerving about her silence, about the controlled way she had claimed their insult. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. She kept the cartoon not as a wound, but as a reminder. Her silence was a promise to herself, and it was louder and heavier than all their jeers combined. Back in the sterile quiet of her barracks room, she sat on the edge of her tightly made bunk. The small space was Spartan, containing only the essentials. From her duffel bag, she pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was of her and her older sister, Lyra, standing in front of their father's old Cessna, grinning into the wind, their hair a tangled mess. Lyra, who had also been a pilot, had been the one who believed in her, the one who had snuck her flight manuals and whispered stories of the sky when their parents spoke of law school. Lyra was gone now, her life cut short in a training accident years ago, but her belief in Ilara remained a burning ember in her soul. Ilara traced the edge of the photo with her thumb, her jaw tight. Lyra would have told her to fight back, to speak up, but that wasn't Ilara's way. Lyra was fire. Ilara was water. She wore down obstacles, not with explosions, but with relentless, quiet pressure. She carefully tucked the photo away and pulled out something else, a worn notebook. Its pages were filled not with words, but with sketches, maps, topographical lines, and flight paths drawn from memory with an artist's precision. For months, she had been obsessed with one particular region in the operational theater, a treacherous valley system nicknamed the Wolf's Jaw. It was a natural choke point, a perfect place for ground forces to get pinned down, a death trap disguised as a shortcut. Nobody had asked her to study it. Nobody cared. But she had run the scenario in the base's single A-10 simulator over and over until her fingers knew every turn, every gust of wind that swept down from the high ridges, every shadow that could conceal a surface-to-air missile. This was her true work, done in the dead of night, in the solitary hum of the machine. The simulator bay was her sanctuary. It was located in a separate, low-slung building at the edge of the tarmac, often deserted after hours. Tonight, Ilara slipped in through an unlocked side door, the familiar scent of cool electronics and ozone washing over her. The main lights were off, leaving the room bathed in the eerie glow of emergency strips and the blinking standby lights of the equipment. In the center of the cavernous room sat the simulator, a domed capsule on a hydraulic platform, looking like a dormant alien insect. She climbed the metal steps and settled into the replica, a 10 cockpit. Here, she wasn't small. Here, she wasn't the inventory queen. Here, she was a commander of 30 tons of flying steel. She initiated the startup sequence, her hands moving with an unconscious grace over the panels and switches. The screens flickered to life, bathing her face in a green and amber glow. She loaded the program. Scenario: Wolf's Jaw, close air support. The canopy display lit up, showing a photorealistic rendering of the rugged, sun-bleached terrain. The hydraulic system hissed and whirred, tilting the capsule as she taxied and took off. In moments, she was soaring over the digital landscape. Below her, the valley unfolded a jagged scar in the earth, just as she had memorized from her maps. Thunderbolt 7, this is Trident Actual, a digitized voice crackled in her headset. We are pinned down at coordinates 09 or 7 by 341. Enemy positions on the north and east ridges. We are taking heavy fire, danger close. Alara's body relaxed into the familiar rhythm of the mission. Her eyes scanned the terrain, her mind processing dozens of variables at once. Airspeed, altitude, wind shear off the cliffs, the flickering IR strobes of the friendly forces below, the muzzle flashes of the enemy. Trident Actual, Thunderbolt 7 is inbound. I have eyes on you, she responded, her voice calm and clipped. She banked the Warthog hard, pushing the simulated aircraft into a steep dive, a maneuver that would make most pilots sick. The valley walls rushed up to meet her. A red warning light flashed on her console, a simulated SAM launch from a hidden position on the north ridge. She didn't flinch. She deployed flares, broke hard left, and felt the satisfying shudder as the simulator mimicked the G-forces. The missile streaked past her virtual canopy. Target acquired, she murmured to herself. She lined up her attack run, her thumb hovering over the trigger on the joystick. The enemy position was nestled in a rock outcropping, perilously close to the friendly strobes, a 30-meter separation. Standard doctrine dictated a minimum safe distance of 100 meters for this type of ordnance. But the A-10 wasn't a standard aircraft, and Alara wasn't a standard pilot. She squeezed the trigger. The simulator roared, a deep, bone-rattling brrr that vibrated through the cockpit floor, mimicking the GAU-8 cannon. On the screen, a stream of 30mm tracers tore into the rock outcropping, turning the digital target into a cloud of dust and debris. Shack. Good hit. The simulated voice of her wingman confirmed. No friendly casualties. She pulled up, her breath slow and even sweat beading on her forehead. She flew the mission for another hour, methodically, brutally, and brilliantly. She eliminated every target, carved a path for the trapped SEALs, and guided them to an extraction point. She did it faster, cleaner, and with more precision than the last time. The screen flashed green. Mission successful. All friendlies extracted. She leaned back, the tension finally draining from her shoulders. She wiped her brow with the back of her flight suit sleeve. This was run number 72. 72 times she had saved these digital soldiers. 72 times she had proven she could do it. A loud, jarring bang on the capsule door shattered her concentration. What the hell is going on in there? A gruff voice yelled from outside. This bay is supposed to be locked down. The door hissed open. A portly senior NCO, a master sergeant named Mills, who ran the maintenance schedule, stood there, his face a mask of angry confusion. His eyes fell on Alara, still strapped into the pilot's seat. His anger morphed into pure contempt. Vance, you're not authorized for night sessions. What do you think this is? A video arcade? Alara began the shutdown sequence, her face unreadable. She unstrapped herself and gathered her things without a word. As she climbed out of the simulator, Mills shook his head, a smirk twisting his lips. You know, Captain, playing hero in a box won't make you any taller. Get back to your barracks. Now. She walked past him, her chin held high, the insult just one more piece of fuel for the fire. She didn't need him to believe in her. She didn't need any of them. She had the wolf's jaw, she had her maps, and she had the quiet, unshakable certainty that a day was coming when all of this, the mockery, the doubt, the lonely hours in the dark would matter. She just didn't know that day was less than 12 hours away. The next morning, the desert sun had not yet bleached the color from the sky when the pilots gathered for the daily briefing. The air in the room was cold, recycled, and thick with the tension of men who lived on the edge of life and death. It was a sterile, windowless space where careers were made or broken on the strength of a PowerPoint slide. At the front of the room stood Major Corbin Grant. He was a man built like a bulldog, with broad shoulders, a thick neck, and slicked-back hair that seemed immune to the desert's grit. He wore his rank like a suit of armor, and his smile, which he used often, never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He paced before the large screen, a remote in his hand, his voice a confident baritone that filled every corner of the room. "All right, listen up. We've got a standard reconnaissance and patrol mission for Saberflight. Route takes them east, along the Ashgar mountain range, skirting the northern entrance to Sector Gamma 7. A map glowed on the screen, a web of green and brown topographical lines. A bold red line snaked along a series of ridges. Elara, seated in the back row as usual, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Sector Gamma 7 was the official designation for the valley system she knew as the Wolf's Jaw. Grant's voice droned on, outlining fuel loads, communication protocols, and acceptable rules of engagement. He spoke with the easy authority of a man who had never been proven wrong, or at least had never admitted it. Alara's pencil hovered over her notebook. Her mind raced, replaying the simulations, the countless ways the mission could go wrong. The patrol route Grant had outlined would take the jets directly over the mouth of the valley, a perfect, inviting target. She felt the familiar internal battle rage. One voice, the voice of her upbringing and her experience at this base, screamed at her to stay silent. "Don't make waves. Don't give them another reason to mock you. You're the inventory queen, remember?" They won't listen. But another voice, quieter and more resolute, a voice that sounded a lot like her sister Lyra's, cut through the noise. "What is knowledge for, if not to be used? What is a warning if it's never spoken?" Grant was wrapping up. "Any questions?" he asked, his gaze sweeping the room, the question purely rhetorical. Alara's hand went up. It was a small, hesitant gesture, but in the silent room, it was as loud as a gunshot. Every head swiveled to face her. Grant's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Jet Ryder, sitting in the front row, smirked and shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Captain Vance," Grant said, his tone sharp, daring her to speak. Elara stood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain level. "Sir, with all due respect, the proposed route for Saberflight is dangerously exposed. The northern entrance to the Wolves to Sector Gamma 7 is a textbook ambush point." She took a steadying breath, her mind clicking through the data points she knew by heart. The ridges on either side provide excellent cover for anti-aircraft emplacements. Wind patterns in the area create unpredictable downdrafts, making low-altitude evasion difficult. Any ground unit entering that valley without extensive air superiority would be walking into a kill box. She laid out the facts like a surgeon, arranging her instruments not with emotion, but with the cold, hard logic of terrain and tactics. A heavy silence descended upon the room. For a moment, it seemed her logic might actually penetrate the wall of prejudice. Then, Grant let out a short, sharp snort of derision. "A geography lesson." "How fascinating," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Captain Vance, we appreciate your theoretical concerns. But we are the United States Air Force, not a hiking club. We need warriors who can execute missions, not analysts who are afraid of shadows on a map." The laughter that followed was sharp and obligatory. It was the sound of subordinates appeasing their superior. Jet Ryder seized the moment, leaning to his wingman, but speaking loud enough for the whole room to hear. "She's probably just mad she's not cleared to fly anything more complicated than a cargo manifest." More laughter, this time more genuine, more cruel. The tension in the room broke, and Elara was left standing alone in the wreckage. A flush of heat crept up her neck, a hot tide of humiliation. But she held her ground, her face a calm, unreadable mask. She met Grant's dismissive glare for a long moment before sitting down, her movements controlled, her dignity intact even in defeat. She had said her piece. The failure to listen was not hers. As the briefing concluded and the pilots began to file out, their chatter now light and boisterous. Alara remained seated, gathering her notes. A shadow fell over her table. She looked up to see Captain Kinsley Rowe, a fellow pilot with a perpetually bright smile and an impeccable record. Kinsley was well liked, a master of navigating the social currents of the base. "Alara," Kinsley said, her voice a confection of concern. "That was brave, what you did, but you have to be more careful." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Grant doesn't like being challenged, especially not in public. I'm just looking out for you. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better for us to just keep our heads down and do the job." The words were a knife wrapped in velvet. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. It was the friendly fire of a woman who had chosen to assimilate rather than challenge. "Thank you for your concern, Kinsley," Alara said, her voice devoid of warmth. She saw the flicker of disappointment in Kinsley's eyes. Her performance of sisterly solidarity had not been appreciated. The professional consequences came swiftly. By midday, an official notice was delivered to her. She was to report to the 45th Logistics Squadron, effective immediately. Her duties would involve overseeing inventory management and ordnance manifests for the entire wing. The transfer was indefinite. She read the single sheet of paper 3 times. It was a formal, bureaucratic execution. They hadn't just ignored her, they had buried her. The nickname had become a job description. The inventory queen now had a kingdom, a vast, soulless warehouse at the far end of the flight line. The warehouse was a cathedral of forgotten equipment, smelling of dust, oil, and the faint, metallic tang of decay. Crates were stacked to the rafters, containing everything from spare engine turbines to boxes of MREs. Her new office was a cramped, windowless cage of chain-link fencing in one corner. This was her exile. She spent the afternoon as commanded, her hands moving with the same precision she applied to a pre-flight checklist. She cross-referenced serial numbers, updated digital logs, and organized shipping manifests. She did the work without complaint, her focus absolute. The mechanics and logistics personnel watched her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. They saw a fallen officer, a pilot stripped of her wings. They didn't see the truth, that in their minds, she had never had them in the first place. That night, the base felt different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper. The laughter from the rec room seemed to mock her from across the base. But Alara didn't go to her barracks. She walked in the opposite direction, toward the familiar, low-slung building that housed her only remaining solace. The simulator bay was dark and silent. She slipped inside, the heavy door closing behind her with a definitive thud, shutting out the world that had rejected her. She didn't turn on the main lights. The glow from the console was enough. She climbed into the cockpit, the replica seat, a more welcome embrace than any human one she had experienced on this base. The cockpit was a womb of purpose, a place where only skill mattered. Gender, size, and the opinions of men like Corbin Grant simply ceased to exist. She initiated the startup sequence. The screens flickered to life. Scenario, Wolf's Jaw, close air support. She took a deep, centering breath and began. This time, it was different. This wasn't practice anymore. This was a ritual. This was an act of defiance. Every maneuver was sharper, every decision more instinctive. Her hands danced over the controls, a seamless extension of her will. She didn't just fly the mission, she became it. She anticipated the SAM launch before the warning light even flashed. She saw the ambush points not as data on a map, but as a living, breathing threat. The brutal, beautiful ballet of destruction and salvation played out on the screen before her. She flew with a cold, contained fury. Each burst from the virtual cannon was a punctuation mark to every insult. Brr, that was for Ryder's smirk. Brr, that was for Grant's condescension. Brr, that was for Kinsley's false sympathy. The digitized voice of Trident Actual crackled in her ears, but she barely heard him. The machine and the pilot had become one, a perfect synthesis of human intellect and mechanical power. The mission concluded in record time. The screen glowed with the familiar, verdant light of victory. Mission successful. All friendlies extracted. 0 casualties. She leaned her head back against the seat, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The sweat on her skin was cold in the chilled air of the bay, She had done it. Again. She had perfected the impossible. This was run number 73, the final rehearsal. She didn't know it yet, but the curtain was about to rise on the real thing. It began not with a bang, but with a sound that tore the very fabric of the base's monotonous afternoon routine. A high, keening wail from the command post sirens, a sound reserved for the gravest of emergencies. It was a nerve-shredding scream that sliced through the mundane chatter in the mess hall, the clank of tools in the hangars, and the quiet rustle of paperwork in Alara's chain-link office. Instantly, the base convulsed. Airmen ran across the tarmac, their boots pounding on the sun-baked concrete. Radios, once filled with laconic exchanges, now crackled with a frantic, static-laced panic. Alara dropped her pen, the inventory manifest forgotten. She was already moving, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She didn't need to be told. She knew. The command center was a maelstrom of controlled chaos, threatening to boil over into outright panic. Officers shouted into headsets, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. On the main tactical screen that dominated the front wall, a map of the Ashgar mountain range was displayed. And in the center of it, nestled deep within the jagged lines of Sector Gamma 7, a cluster of friendly icons blinked a desperate, ominous red. The wolf's jaw had sprung its trap. Major Corbin Grant stood at the center of the storm, his face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. He was barking orders, his voice strained, but his commands were reactive, pointless. He was a man drowning in a crisis, too big for his ego. "Saberflight? What's your status? Talk to me, Ryder." He yelled into his microphone. Jet Ryder's voice, usually so full of arrogant swagger, came back thin and tight with stress. "Negative. Command. I can't get a firing solution." They're dug in too deep, and the friendlies are. God, they're right on top of them. Danger close is an understatement. Any run I make risks fratricide. The F-16 seconds, designed for speed and high-altitude dominance, were like surgical scalpels in a butcher shop, the wrong tool for a bloody, intimate fight. "Then send in the pave lows," Grant roared at a communications officer. A different voice, filled with dread, answered from the air traffic control station. "Command, Vulture 1 is down. I repeat, Vulture 1 took a missile on approach. We've lost their signal." A moment later, another call. "Vulture 2 is hit. They're going down." On the tactical screen, 2 of the blue helicopter icons vanished, replaced by the grim, final symbol of a wreck. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The SEALs were trapped, the F-16 seconds were useless, and the rescue helicopters were being swatted from the sky like flies. They had sent 381 of their best men into the exact meat grinder Alara had described. And the system, the proud, infallible system of command and control, had no answer. It was into this vortex of failure that Alara Vance walked. She moved through the frantic bodies with a calm, deliberate purpose, a still point in a frantic storm. Her flight suit, the one they mocked, now seemed like the only proper uniform in the room. She stopped a few feet behind Grant, her eyes fixed on the map, her face impassive. It was her simulation, brought to horrifying life. She waited for a pause in the shouting, a brief moment of exhausted silence, and then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the electric tension like a diamond through glass. "Sir." Grant spun around, his eyes wild. He didn't seem to recognize her for a second, seeing only a junior officer who had no place in his crisis. "What is it, Captain? Can't you see we're in the middle of—" "I've flown this mission 73 times, Alara said, her gaze unwavering, locked on his. "In the simulator, I know the terrain, I know the enemy positions, I know the wind currents. I can get them out." The statement hung in the air, audacious and absolute. Every head in the command center turned to her. The chaos momentarily ceased, replaced by a stunned, collective intake of breath. For a heartbeat, there was a flicker of something in Grant's eyes, not hope, but a desperate, grasping curiosity. It was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar bulwark of his pride. His face contorted into a mask of pure fury. Who was this woman, this clerk, to offer a solution where he had none? To stand there, calm and certain, while his career was going up in flames? "Are you insane?" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "This is not a video game, Vance. Those are real Sams out there, not pixels on a screen. We have a SEAL team being massacred, and you want to talk about your little hero fantasies?" He took a step toward her, his finger jabbing at her chest. "You are a logistics officer. You are not combat certified for this operation. You are not authorized to even be in this room, let alone touch an aircraft. Now get the hell out of my command center before I have you arrested for insubordination." His voice was loud enough to shake the room. A logistics officer near the door, a man with a clipboard perpetually in hand, leaned toward a colleague. "She's delusional," he whispered, loud enough for Ilara to hear. "Thinks her simulator tricks can save the day." Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply held Grant's gaze for one final searing moment. He saw no fear in her eyes. He saw no anger. He saw only a profound and unsettling certainty that he could not comprehend. Then she turned her back on him. She walked out of the command center, not with the hurried shuffle of a reprimanded subordinate, but with the steady, measured pace of a pilot heading for her aircraft. The shouting and chaos resumed behind her, but it was just noise now, the meaningless death rattle of a failed system. She was already in another place, her mind miles away, soaring over the ridges of the Wolf's Jaw. Her path was direct. She walked past the barracks, past the mess hall, her boots echoing on the concrete. She was a ghost moving through a base that had never truly seen her. Her destination was Hangar 4, where a single A-10 Warthog, tail number 297, sat prepped and armed for a training run that had been canceled in the wake of the crisis. It waited for her like a dormant beast. The A-10 was not a sleek, beautiful aircraft like the F-16. It was a creature of brutal purpose, ugly and powerful, a flying tank built around the most terrifying cannon ever mounted on a plane. It was an angel of death designed for one thing: protecting soldiers on the ground. She climbed the boarding ladder, her movements a fluid, memorized dance. She slid into the cockpit, the cramped space closing around her like a second skin. This was her true home. Her hands moved with an unconscious familiarity over the instrument panel, flipping switches, checking gauges, bringing the machine to life. The hum of the avionics was a symphony to her ears. Before she closed the canopy, she pulled a small, folded piece of paper from her pocket, the crude cartoon of the pilot drowning in her flight suit. She looked at it for a moment, then tucked it away. From another pocket, she took out a pen and a small, official-looking notepad. She paused, her pen hovering over the page. She wrote 2 short lines. "Lyra, if I don't come back, at least I chose this." She folded the note and tucked it deep inside her flight suit, next to the place where the photo of her sister rested against her skin. She sealed the canopy, shutting out the world. The engines whined, then roared to life with a deafening shriek. Through her headset, the radio crackled. It was Grant, his voice apoplectic, almost incoherent with rage. "Vance, I see you. What in God's name do you think you're doing? That is a direct order. Shut down those engines. I will personally see you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Vance, do you hear me?" Ilara reached forward and calmly switched off the command channel frequency. The Major's furious voice vanished, replaced by a quiet hiss. She adjusted the dial, opening the channel to the SEAL team's frequency, a channel she had memorized from her simulations. The only voices she needed to hear now were the men in the valley. With a lurch, the A-10 rolled onto the runway. She didn't wait for clearance from the tower. She pushed the throttles forward, and the Warthog surged ahead, a 30-ton projectile of defiance. The engine screamed, pinning her to her seat as the plane devoured the tarmac. She pulled back on the stick, and with a power that felt like the earth itself breaking its bonds, the A-10 clawed its way into the sky, leaving a base full of doubt, procedure, and impotent fury behind her. She was a lone warrior, flying a disobedient mission, carrying the weight of 381 lives on her wings. In the cockpit, the world narrowed to a sliver of smoke-choked canyon and the flickering, life-affirming strobes of the men below. The valley unfolded beneath her, a perfect, terrifying replica of her simulations. Alara was no longer a pilot flying a plane. She was the conductor of a violent symphony, her hands moving with an otherworldly calm on the controls. The chaos below was not chaos to her. It was a problem with a known solution, a deadly equation she had solved 73 times before. Her voice, when it cut through the frantic radio chatter, was a blade of pure composure. Thunderbolt 7, engaging. An F-16 pilot, his voice tight with stress, shot back. "Who the hell is Thunderbolt 7? Command, we have an unauthorized aircraft in the AO." Alara didn't answer him. Words were a luxury they couldn't afford. Her first pass was a scream of roaring engines, a low, terrifying dive that skimmed the ridgetops. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened its mouth, and for a breathtaking second, it seemed to spit thunder. The brrr of the 30mm rounds tore through the air, a sound that shook the very bones of the mountains. The shells landed in a precise, devastating line, shredding an enemy machine gun nest just 25 meters from the SEAL's forward position. A new voice, raw and filled with a mixture of shock and profound gratitude, came over the SEAL's frequency. "Thunderbolt 7, whoever you are, you just saved my flank. This is Trident Actual. Mark my strobes for your next run." It was Hawk. His voice was the anchor of reality in her digital dream. "Copy, Trident Actual," Alara replied, her tone all business. She banked the Warthog hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat, her eyes already scanning for the next target. Back at Al-Qarid, the command center was a pressure cooker of disbelief and rage. The live feed from a drone high above showed the lone A-10 weaving through the valley with impossible grace. "She's a reckless fool," Grant yelled, his face a blotchy red. He couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't in any manual. This wasn't doctrine. She's not saving anyone. She's leading them to a mass grave. A priority message flashed on the main screen. An override from headquarters. A disembodied voice crackled over the room's speakers. "Thunderbolt 7, you are in violation of a direct order. Cease engagement immediately. I repeat, ceasefire immediately." Jet Rider, his own jet now circling uselessly high above the fray, grabbed a mic, his voice, dripping with scorn and a new, unfamiliar hint of fear, was broadcast into Alara's headset. "Vance, do you have any idea what you're doing? If you're off by just 2 meters, 381 men will die because of you." Alara heard them all, the commands, the threats, the scorn. It was all just static, distant, and meaningless noise from a world that no longer applied to her. Her world was the valley, the strobes, and the targets. She ignored them, pushing the A-10 into another punishing maneuver, a move she'd practiced 100 times in the dark. She flew low, hugging the jagged western wall of the mountain, a tactic that kept her shielded from the enemy's remaining SAM radars. The A-10 became a shadow in the dusk, a whisper of death before the thunder. She targeted a mortar position dug into a cave, a target just 20 meters from a pinned-down SEAL squad. It was a shot no pilot in their right mind would ever take. The cannon roared again. The cave disappeared in a cloud of dust and pulverized rock. On the tactical map in the command center, the green dots representing the SEALs began to move, a slow, steady crawl toward an escape corridor. The room went quiet. The shouting stopped. On the radio, the F-16 pilot's voice came through again, low and stunned. "My God, this isn't recklessness, this is genius." Grant's hands were frozen on the console, his jaw tight, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He wasn't watching a disaster, he was watching a miracle, and he was on the wrong side of it. For 6 hours, she flew. She was a relentless, tireless guardian angel, her passes becoming a rhythm of salvation. She carved a path through the fire and smoke, her fuel gauge dipping dangerously low, her body aching with fatigue. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon in shades of rose and gold, the valley fell quiet. The SEAL strobes blinked out, one by one, as they reached the extraction zone. Trident Actual's voice came through one last time, steady but heavy with the weight of the night. "Thunderbolt 7, you're our angel. Get home safe." Alara didn't respond. She just turned the nose of her warthog toward home, the rising sun on her face. When she landed, the runway was lined with military police, their cuffs glinting in the morning light. Major Grant was there, his face no longer red with anger, but pale with a cold, vengeful fury. His entire world had been upended by the quiet woman climbing out of the cockpit, and he was determined to put it right. "Vance!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "You disobeyed a direct order. You endangered a multi-million-dollar asset. You made me a joke to the entire Air Force." He gestured to the MPs. "Arrest her." Alara stood straight, her flight suit dusty, her face calm. She faced them alone, a solitary figure against the vast backdrop of the runway. She had known this was coming. She was ready. As the MPs stepped forward, their hands reaching for their cuffs, a new sound began. It was a single, rough voice from the crowd of mechanics and ground crew that had gathered to watch. "You're all blind," shouted Silas, the old mechanic, pushing his way to the front. He had seen her in the hangar late at night, long after her shifts, her head buried in technical manuals. He pointed a trembling, oil-stained finger at Grant. "She just saved 381 men, and you're going to cuff her? You'd rather let those boys die than admit a woman you overlooked is a better pilot than any of you." The crowd shifted, uneasy. A murmur of agreement rippled through them. The MPs hesitated, their hands hovering. Then, the ground began to shake with a new, rhythmic thunder. It was the sound of boots, hundreds of them. Marching onto the runway, in perfect formation, were the SEALs. All 381 of them. Their gear was still caked with the dust and grime of the wolf's jaw, their faces etched with exhaustion and grim determination. They marched past the MPs, past the stunned officers, and formed a silent, immovable wall of men in front of Alara's A-10, shielding her. Theuta Hawk, his face a roadmap of scars and grit, stepped forward and took a loudspeaker from a crew chief. His voice boomed across the silent tarmac, heavy with the undeniable authority of a man who had just walked out of hell. "Without the pilot of this aircraft, the woman you call Thunderbolt 7, he declared, his eyes locking onto Grant's, today would have been the largest mass funeral in the history of naval special warfare. The base fell silent. The wind whispered across the runway. Then, from the back, Silas began to clap. A medic joined in. Then a young airman, then a guard, then another pilot. The sound grew, swelling from a scatter of pops into a thunderous, rolling wave of applause that washed over the tarmac, drowning out every doubt, every insult, every whisper she had ever endured. Major Grant stood frozen, his face ashen. The court-martial talk died in his throat. He looked at the wall of SEALs, heard the thunder of applause, and saw the quiet, unbreakable woman they were all celebrating. He was defeated. Slowly, stiffly, he raised his hand to his brow in a salute. His hand was shaking. Alara Vance didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply looked at the sea of faces, at the men whose lives she had saved, and gave a single, small nod. Then she turned and walked toward the hangar, her boots steady, her back straight. The fallout was quiet but absolute. Major Grant was reassigned to a desk job in Alaska, his career trajectory a flat line. Jet Ryder's cavalier attitude earned him a formal reprimand that grounded him for months. Kinsley Rowe found her friendly smiles were no longer returned. Her social currency had been rendered worthless. Alara's name became a quiet legend. Her simulator runs were dissected in tactical briefings. The Vance roll, a mountainside hugging maneuver she had perfected, was officially added to cadet training manuals. One afternoon, a young pilot who had once laughed at her approached her in the hangar, his eyes on the floor. "Captain, I was wrong about you," he mumbled. Could you show me that maneuver?" Alara looked at him, her hazel eyes unreadable. Then she handed him a flight manual. "Start here," she said, her voice calm but firm. That evening, back in her barracks room, she pulled out the worn photo of her and Lyra. She set it on her desk, her fingers brushing the edge. The base was quieter now, the whispers gone. replaced by a deep, unspoken respect. She had been judged, mocked, and dismissed. But she had stood her ground, not with words or anger, but with relentless preparation and a single, world-changing act of courage. And that, she knew, was more than enough.